Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's episode of the Daily Sib. It's Friday. Another week has flown past. You may notice I'm in a different setting. We've got a digger out the front where I'm normally sat in the lounge, and so I've moved rooms so we're not interrupted by the building work going on in our front garden today. So yeah, a bit of a different background, but I'm quite liking this one actually. And one of my big passions is our focus today around leisure and tourism. As you all know, I've done lots of travels and explored many different hotels and many different destinations. And it's going to be a pleasure to chat with Robin Sheppard about his work around accessible hotels, but more particularly beautiful and not just functional, but cool hotels. And just, yeah, a pleasure to stay in. So, Robin, first of all, thank you for joining me today.
My pleasure, Martin. How do you do?
All good. Yeah, I'm enjoying the sunshine as well today. It's been miserable the last few weeks, so been getting a bit of garden time as well, which is good. Where are you based from, him?
I live just north of Woodstock, so in spitting distance of Blenheim Palace and all that jazz, which mercifully has been tourist free recently. So it's been very nice to walk around the gardens there and have nobody else in sight. It's one of the few benefits of lockdown is that extra sense of space you've got around you. But we're very fortunate. It's a nice part of the world to live in.
So. No, fantastic. Yeah, definitely a lovely area. And honestly, I've been doing these daily shows for, it's got to be 3 months now. I keep meaning to share the YouTube link where people sort of catch up on past interviews. But there has been this sort of running theme of silver linings with COVID-19. I know we'll get into that a bit later. And I'm sure in your sector of tourism, it's been a bit more challenging, but we have heard various sort of, time to take stock, time to enjoy the countryside a bit more. Like there have been these sort of silver linings. So it's interested you said that within your beautiful area of the world. But yeah, if you could just kick us off, it'd be great for people watching just to get to learn a bit about you, sort of background and what you've been up to career-wise.
Well, that's kind, Martin. I'm an hotelier in his 65th year now, so I've made an awful lot of mistakes along the way to learn what not to do. I've been in the hotel game since I was 15 3/4 when I first took a job in a hotel which will remain nameless in the West Country. And on day 4, I came into the hotel. I'll quickly tell this story because it's quite amusing. And the very tall and thin, long and thin general manager was draped over the bar in the afternoon on a Saturday. His nickname was Streaky Bacon because he was long and thin, and at 15 3/4 you don't really think that he might have a real name, so I just called him Mr. Bacon. And I said, "Are you all right, Mr. Bacon?" And he'd obviously had the sherry in the afternoon. He said, "No, I'm not all right. My wife's just run off with the restaurant manager," and he pirouetted and collapsed over a coffee table, knocking himself spark out.
Oh my God.
So I put a napkin over his face, dragged him by the armpits into a broom cupboard just straight out of Basil Fawlty. I remember horse whispering into his ear, "Does this mean you won't be taking the orders tonight, sir?" So we had a sink or swim dinner dance that evening with about 180 people, something like that. And we sank without trace. And I remember getting home to my parents and saying, "I never, ever, ever want to work at a hotel ever again." And I realized it was the theatrical thing for me. So it's been a bit of fun. In the years, about 20 years ago, I set up with a business partner called Hayden Fenton, a little management business called Bespoke Hotels. We assembled a bit of money to buy a hotel just outside Stratford-upon-Avon called Billesley Manor, and went into the marketplace and in true Blue Peter fashion said, "Here's one we prepared earlier." And we were able to say, "Here's our own asset, we can do this for you." And to our astonishment and delight, half a dozen hotel owners said, "Look, could you come and help us with how we're running our own hotel?" So suddenly, year on, we had 7 properties in the group, and it kind of took off from there. And here we are, 100 plus hotels in the UK, and still going strong 20 years later.
And so you sort of talked about Bespoke hotels and yeah, the way that it unfolded, but was that always around accessibility and inclusion, or did that come later?
No, I don't want people to get their handkerchiefs out and start crying with this, but I had a horrendous illness arrive at the end of Christmas '04. So 15 years ago, I contracted something called Guillain-Barré syndrome, which is a paralyzing illness. So I went from having pins and needles in my fingers and toes, and 24 hours later I was paralyzed from the neck downwards, and I couldn't move a muscle. I was on life support. I couldn't feed myself. I had to be fed through my nose straight into the duodenum. I couldn't breathe unsupported. I couldn't move a muscle.
Wow.
And to be honest, I thought I'd gone.
Yeah.
And I remember passing out when they said your breathing might give out. And I remember passing out when my breathing did give out. And of course, cognitive thought is a very misty thing in a situation like that. So as I started to re-emerge, I wasn't sure I was waking up and whether I'd gone up to see my maker or down to see the other bloke.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, if it's God, it's got to be Beethoven or someone jolly, something splendid. And it was Noddy Holder singing "So Here It Is, Merry Christmas."
Blimey.
I've definitely gone to hell. So all the nurses were there. It was Christmas Day. I'd passed out on Christmas Eve. That was my Christmas present to my family, was to end up in hospital. And 2 years later, I emerged having learned how to sit, how to stand, and how to shuffle along in a quasi-walking fashion. I don't have all my motor skills, but I can still shout, and I can shout at the team members in Bespoke who have put up with me after all these years.
If they get drunk and fall on the coffee table.
Exactly. So I had a very direct experience of what it was like to have an extraordinarily large level of compromise in my life.
Yeah.
And as I came back into hotels, the seed was there, firstly, to do something for that particular charity. So I wrote a book about what it was like to be on the inside of the illness called A Solitary Confinement. That did okay. I ran out of friends because I harried everybody who I used to call a friend to buy a copy of the book. So they all got very tired of me very quickly. But I realized that wasn't enough. And I was rooting around thinking, well, how can we make the lot of the compromised customer a better and more enjoyable one? Well, there were so many levels on which one could help. So it took me a while, but in 2015, we began the journey with what is now called the Blue Badge Access Awards.
Mm-hmm. With Fiona.
With Fiona Jarvis, who's a fireball and someone I'm terribly fond of.
She was on the show about a month ago or so.
Well, I she's such a spirited lady, and I take all my hats off to her. I think she's great fun. So Fiona's been an inspiration to work alongside, and together we've created quite a lot of noise about the sector and begun to score some little bits of success in terms of people's acceptance of what is acceptable. By that I mean that I don't think people should constantly go into a hotel and feel they've been marginalized or relegated when they're given a disabled room. Well, first of all, I don't think they should be called the disabled room. Next, the disabled room shouldn't be next to the lifts with a poor view. Next, the Christmas decorations shouldn't be stored in the disabled loo all 364 days of the year until Christmas Day when they come out. So there's just all sorts of rules that were wrong. So I started with a bit of evangelism in our group, getting some behavior going. But then I realized that the product needed a bit more thinking. So the very first year we worked with the Royal Institute of British Architects running a competition for the Access Awards, and a chap called Ed Warner and his company Motion Spot appeared.
Ed's been on the show as well,
Well, Ed's a real gent, and the story behind his company is a marvelous one.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then you meet extraordinary companies like Sesame Access, who you think, why didn't I think of that? The genius idea of the disappearing staircase, which enables a wheelchair to get in and above. Anyway, cut a long story short, we've been around this for a while now. We're in our fourth year of giving out prizes with Fiona until COVID came along. And we've recognized a number of people. Ed has become a friend and someone we've given a huge amount of work to. We felt we ought to put his breadth and vision into the way in which we specify our own hotel rooms. So if you're happy for me to carry on chatting, I'll just
absolutely, it's fascinating.
We felt we needed to put our money where our mouth was. So as an exemplar of what the new normal we believe should be, we opened a hotel in Storm Daniel in Manchester called Hotel Brooklyn, where out of just under 200 bedrooms, 20 of the rooms are accessible. So we've got concealed ceiling hoists. We have accessible suites, which is like unicorn droppings in the rest of the UK. They just don't exist.
Yeah.
And so we've gone totally over the top, but in a way that it's only when you're leaving the room that you would tell the person you just shown that room, oh, by the way, this is DDA compliant. Because we want it to be a delightful experience and not to feel as though you've been put into something that's manifestly different.
Yeah.
We couldn't think what to call these rooms because accessible or disabled just didn't really seem to cut it.
Well, accessible is so vague, isn't it? Like what's accessible for me might not be for you, and so on.
Well, the general manager of the hotel had a little light bulb moment. I suppose the clue comes from the name of the hotel, which is called Hotel Brooklyn. So we called the rooms the Liberty Rooms, Statue of Liberty, and suddenly to give liberty to people and a freedom moment was quite powerful.
Yeah, that's nice.
So we're hoping that message is going to catch on and people will start to refer to their own rooms as Liberty Rooms. We shall see. But unfortunately, COVID came along 5 weeks after we've opened, so we've been closed for a lot of the time, and some of that momentum has been lost. But we're over the next week reopening that and most of our other hotels very tentatively because we're not sure what the consumer demand is going to be. But what is, I think, the most chastening thing to come out of this is that for most able-bodied people, the lockdown period has taught them what it is like to have a disability, because so often a disability will make you antisocial, will make you stay at home because you're nervous about how you might be received in a hotel or a restaurant environment. And this has been quite illuminating for people to understand what the lot is like. Now, some may prefer it and say, I never want to go back to an office ever again. But for most people, I think you can go stir crazy with that limitation in your life. So anyway, those are some musings, I suppose.
Yeah, no, really, really helpful. Very interesting to frame the rest of the conversation. So a couple of things I wanted to clarify. So do you own some or any of the hotels, or is it more of a sort of management and consultancy business for other people that own hotels, or a bit of both?
It's three sources of income, really. One is a management contract where we provide a level of service as an agent to the owner, and that can be an institutional owner or a high net worth. We lease a number of our properties where we have 30 to 50-year leases where the responsibility for the maintenance and the upkeep of the hotel is ours. And then we have ownership of a dozen hotels as well. So it's a mixed bag. But the level of service and provision that we would put in as process driven, from purchasing to training to marketing and so on, is pretty centralized in terms of the strength of it. But unlike most other big hotel companies, we've always believed that each hotel should be a local hero. So rather than homogenizing everything and saying you've all got to look like a Holiday Inn or a Hilton hotel, we've said, well, this property has always been known as the Chester Grosvenor or the White Horse, and that's something we want to cherish and celebrate. So bespoke simply becomes a signature or a little endorsement in the bottom right hand as a footnote, rather than the overarching brand over the top. That method has suited us. Hopefully the prescriptive discipline bits the consumer doesn't see too much of, but it makes the hotels work pretty proficiently. But the bit that we do want someone to feel is that they're proud of their local hotel because it has its place in its local community.
Yeah, agreed. Is there a sort of definition of the word boutique, or like for you, what is a boutique hotel in your words?
I think boutique is a term that came as if you go back to the early 80s, the country house hotel was suddenly an explosion in terms of antique buildings being converted by people who've made a bit of money in the city.
Yeah,
are always fancied having smart food. As that supply became saturated, so people started to invest in boutique buildings in the high streets of Britain. So old bank buildings, as the banks changed their tactics about owning real estate. And it was initially an urban explosion of unusual, quirky, smaller hotels than your typical big chain style, but with an individual and local story attached to it, or a particularly interesting bit of character they brought out of that building.
Mm-hmm.
And so boutique came from there, and now it seems to be a bit of a catch-all that it's a broad brush to say, well, it's a boutique hotel because it's either privately owned or it doesn't fit a sort of category, if you like. So
it's kind of non big brand, non multinational. It's that sort of uniqueness, sometimes quirkiness, but it could just be that it's more privately owned, right?
yeah, but it's also, if you look at the internet, it's the most sought after search term. So if you put boutique hotel somewhere in your footnotes around the URL of your website, you'll get more hits than if you don't.
Interesting. Yeah.
So it gets used and abused in order to drive more traffic to your site. So boutique hotel becomes a sort of generic search term now.
So what's interesting for me with my marketing hat on, I think everyone watching knows that there's still more work to do around when you look at inclusion of disabled people across the board. There's still work around health and social care on a sort of policy level. There's still work around employment and being an employee as a disabled person. There's still work around goods and services, but lots of that has progressed and there's been improvements over the years. But the marketing is the bit, almost I feel that the next terrain is, whether it's little or big companies, it's having disabled people marketed to. And so as a disabled person in a wheelchair that needs all the accessibility features, whenever I've traveled, I tend to go to Holiday Inn, Premier Inn, Travelodge, because I know they're going to have that adapted room. It's sort of like, from a lazy consumer perspective, it's easier, but I also, probably from experience, have found it like a needle in a haystack, trying to find a boutique hotel that has the right accessibility. So I'd imagine for you, there's been the challenge of getting the building and the training and essentially the offering and the service accessible to more people. But do you find that a lot of disabled people sort of make presumptions that it won't be suitable for them?
I do, and it only seems to touch the lives of able-bodied people when they're trying to organise an event for that person. Otherwise, they would be ignorant of it. So Auntie Mabel may be in a wheelchair and she's having her 80th, but you end up deciding to bring the caterers to her house rather than going to a hotel.
Yeah.
Because she's very nervous about getting caught short or not having the right facilities, or there being even though it says it's fully accessible, there's a step there that nobody told her about, and
or a Christmas tree in the toilet, right?
Decoration in the toilet. It's always there. It's a constant.
Yeah.
I suppose that's when we first started the award ceremony. The intention was to do so just from a design aesthetic, but I very quickly realised that that wasn't enough. And Fiona had been celebrating those who were going the extra mile through training or just personal effort. And she wanted to reward people who were achieving things in the here and now rather than people designing things for the future, which is why we joined forces to celebrate both the design and the physical, but also the emotional and the touch points.
The customer service side is so important as well.
Well, all the general managers of my group know that every time I see them for a national conference, they're going to get me banging on about accessibility in their business and wanting to know what they've achieved. But I must just share one joyful moment with you. I was at an award ceremony at Grosvenor House in November of last year. It was about 1,000 people at this, and I had a chance to speak briefly. And I chose to speak about access. And I just asked everyone in the room to consider whether they should appoint internally an access champion within their business. Doesn't matter if you're a restaurant, a hotel, or a bar complex, or whatever, you should still have one. And I thought, well, I hope someone's listened to the messaging, and bless them. Glen Eagles Hotel the following morning at 9 o'clock rang to say, I thought you should know we've already appointed our first access champion, at 8:30 this morning, and I thought you'd be really pleased to know that we did hear what you said. So if I can just pick up more examples of hotels that lead the way and influence others, then
Yeah.
that's one way of approaching it. The alternative, you try and do it through government or statute, but that removes the emotional intelligence in this. I think this has got to come from people wanting to do it because it's the right thing to do.
That's the right thing. There's the legal, the whole DDA or Equalities Act thing, but now there's the purple pound thing, the business case that, you know, as you say, if Aunt Mabel can get in one hotel but not another, then it could well be that hotel will be chosen for the whole function and get all of that business, whether it's a wedding or whatever it might be, just because it's accessible. So I think more and more businesses are realizing the business argument is a really, really powerful one, more than ever. I mean, back to the perception of disabled people, or, you know, people with specific access needs. What is it? What's the sort of your views on the pricing? Like, again, I would imagine, you know, a Travelodge Holiday Inn's going to have a cheaper room rate. But what's the reality? Like, is there a massive price difference from a boutique hotel to a brand hotel?
No, there isn't. And in a conventional sense, you just got to go onto Booking.com or Expedia, and you can do a price comparison straight away.
It's easier than ever, right? Yeah.
Whether you go with brand or not. But there have been in the past groups like Premier Inn who really got behind the DDA and Equality Acts and were at the forefront of making budget hotels much more enlightened. But there's been a change in the senior team there, and I don't think that emphasis at the forefront of their minds as it used to be, which is a shame because they're a really big, powerful organization who at a stroke can influence the amount of room stock that is given over to this. I think there's also another paradox here, Martin, with the able-bodied customer who comes in, the hotel's full, and he ends up with the receptionist apologizing for giving him a disabled room.
Yeah. And, even though it's more roomy and pleasant anyway.
Exactly. But you first of all, they're apologizing. Second, they're saying, well, I'll discount it.
Yeah.
That's all I've got left. And to my mind, why do you build that disappointment in? Why shouldn't those rooms be better?
Mm.
So the disabled room has a higher specification than the able-bodied.
Mm.
Charge more money and then say, I tell you what, I'll do you a big favor, so I'm going to charge you the same price as every other room.
Yeah, you're getting a deal, mate. Yeah.
You're getting a deal.
Yeah.
So we need to change the mindset. That's
yeah. Do you think the word disabled, I mean, this thing gets debated all the time and it's hard to find an alternative, but, you know, I sometimes feel the word disabled and disability is part of where that apologetic nature would come from, because the word just has that negative connotation.
Yeah, I do find it. I'm registered disabled myself, so any time that it becomes a topic on a form that needs to be filled in or whatever, there is not a suspicion, but there's a nervousness from an able-bodied person who sometimes is unsure of how to behave. I know we now call this in the sort of common language is disability confident, and giving confidence to able-bodied people around disabled people, I think, is something, again, that needs to come through education and time and enlightenment. And it's a sad indictment of society as it is. But you're right. I think if we could move away from the word disabled and, I don't know, you use liberty as a word.
It's a good word, actually. I like that. I mean, I know, like, from when I worked at Scope, the social model and being a disabled person is disabled by barriers. So the aim is we remove those environmental, attitudinal, procedural barriers, and then there's no disabled, we're just people. But the difficulty of that narrative is most people in the public won't go into the whole thought process of what that really is saying. And in the end, you're still just saying the word not abled, which doesn't resonate very positively.
It's true. And the problem, like me, I entered my 50th year and had never for a moment given proper consideration to the DDA rooms in the hotels I'd run. They existed. It was a normal thing. You had to do them in order to be able to trade. It was just a function.
Like a tick box, really.
And then suddenly I was disabled, thinking, crikey, I've got all these demands and all these needs, which I feel really embarrassed about imposing on other people because I can't
Yeah.
do stuff for myself. And it makes you really antisocial.
Mm.
So I've been through that journey. I still have mobility issues and so on, which I won't chronicle now, but I speak from considerable experience of just how marginalized you can feel if you let that have its effect on you.
Yeah.
And I think what you're trying to do, and hopefully a little scintilla comes out of this chat now, is just to give people confidence to be a little bit more assertive in terms of saying, no, this is how we should behave. This is what we should aspire to.
Yeah.
But
Honestly,
I think the best normal, sorry to interrupt you,
no, it's fine.
was be if we're not having this conversation in 10 years' time, because it's
Yes,
the new normal has arrived and we don't even give it a second.
absolutely. But there's an interesting one because I was up on the same wavelength here. I was going to say that you and I obviously touched base before we went live. That you've met Shrin before, and me and Shrin had the whole Accomable venture, and then obviously Airbnb acquired it. And I think as things start to develop at Airbnb, it will create an impact of having a scalable search function. But I think so it's not to go against what happened at all with Airbnb, but I do feel it's left a void of a sort of brand that isn't from a company business side, but a brand for disabled people where you can search for the accommodations that are accessible. And yeah, I mean, obviously, I think what you're providing is, your brand is about accessibility and inclusion baked in. But I suppose my point is there's this sort of balance that there is a commonality disabled people have around the struggles and the challenges from the world not having been really designed with us in mind. It's a sort of understatement, but that those elements. And so, as you say, in 10 years, we actually want the mainstream brands to just have baked this in. But I also feel until we get there, it's people like yourself with Bespoke Hotels and Ed and Fiona and myself and Shrin that are trying to really bring the disabled consumer market to those businesses, but to give the community that sense of, okay, we're all able to get the right information that we need, and that might be different from someone going on booking.com. So I think my point is that there's the vision where we want to go, but there is still the sort of steps we need to take to get there. And I think we need that voice of disabled people to really come through, so we are going to get the right services and the right information out there. But it'd be great just to hear your thoughts on that thought, really.
Well, the key is the distribution, which you found through Airbnb, and I laud you for it. But I've been not shy in terms of berating Expedia and Booking.com for being rubbish, highlighting and making it easy for a disabled guest to find the right type of accommodation.
Exactly, yeah.
However, I've had a little success with the Automobile Association, who regularly go out and give awards to the leaders and the influences in the accommodation sector. So they have an annual hotel and restaurant awards. And at this year, if it ever takes place, given COVID, this year's award ceremony, we will be officially launching the disability accreditation system, which the AA will manage. Fiona is doing a bit of the groundwork, or was doing a bit of the groundwork pre-COVID, to enable all their inspectors to check on the quality of the disabled facilities in those hotels. Now, this isn't going to make a big difference to the Premier Inns or the travel lodges of the world, because the people who are going to be lauded in the publications and websites of the EA tend to be the best of the best hotels going by definition. But you've got to start somewhere, and my view would be to get the most aspirational hotels, get the ground movement then, and then the chains will follow behind that. So hopefully that would give us a democratic national accreditation base to say, I've been to this hotel, I've posted a picture gallery with a series of frequently asked questions on the website for this particular property, which you can either find through the EA or from the hotel itself.
Yeah.
and that we're doing our best to break the barriers down. Now, in the first year, if you only get 10 hotels doing that, it's a start. If you can then get 20 the following year and away, it'll snowball soon enough, I'm sure. So,
Just out of interest, how come the AA and the automobile industry have the interest in the restaurant or the accommodation industry?
Well, for many years, the AA were impressed by Michelin. And wanted to widen the appeal to the traveller, and to give them an extra product to sell. So Michelin Guide came out to support the sale of tyres through motor cars.
Yes, yeah.
And the AA was the same. So they decided, well, we're representing motorists. What do motorists like to do? Well, they like to find somewhere
Makes sense.
to stop on their journey. So it was always an adjunct to that. The RAC used to do the same, although they ceased doing it about 25 years ago, I suppose now. And there was an Egon Roney Guide many years ago, which was when Egon was still alive, which was the only way that you got an assessment of whether a place was worth visiting or not, because the internet didn't exist in those days. So
yeah,
the AA has come from a non-internet world.
Yeah,
still has the award ceremony, and the key crucial thing is people love to win prizes.
Yeah,
and if there's a body out there, certainly, I think if you speak to any self-respecting hotelier, they'd say the AA inspector's report is really worth reading, because it's going to tell me objectively and subjectively how I can improve my product. So they use it as an independent measure. It's a weapon in their arsenal, as well as being something that you want to show off through.
Yeah.
So it was a natural segue to ask them to work with us. So I'm delighted to say that's underway. But
that's really exciting. Yeah.
But it takes all these little wins. You've got to keep aggregating, hoping. And then just when you get the relationship going with one organization, the CEO moves on, and then you build a relationship with the next one.
Yeah.
So there we are.
And I was thinking it's similar but different, but Guinness actually sponsor the Guinness Book of World Records, which you might say, what as an alcoholic beverage got to do with crazy stunts and challenges that go in a book, but it's in the end that sort of branding and marketing and helping build awareness of products and services to more consumers, isn't it?
Well, I have to tell you the story of the Book of the Year awards. The organizing committee couldn't think who a sponsor should be, and they went through a list of company names, and of course they came across Booker, the food cash and distribution business, and said, would you like to sponsor the Book of the Year awards? People were so, and even now it's had many other sponsors, but it's still known as the Booker Prize.
Right.
So as a sponsor getting value out of their investment, it's been very, very productive for them.
Yeah, I think you're just sending my mind off into general marketing geek world, but it's even like the way we call a vacuum cleaner a Hoover, even though Hoover is just one brand of a product. Yeah. Cool. We've got a few comments and a question actually coming in from the viewers. So Mark near at the beginning said, hello, gents. So good to see you, Mark. Thanks for joining. Kim says, this sounds very interesting. How do I find out more? Well, in terms of what we've just been talking about has given more insights, and I'll get Robin to share sort of websites and contact details at the end before we finish as well to follow up. Rob, who's a fellow tourism and travel blogger, says, makes me want to never stay in a travel lodge ever again. Nice one, Rob. Chris saying, hi, Kim, these interviews are great. Rob, here's a question. What features in general constitute an accessible room? In one word.
First of all, access into the room, the width of the doorway, and the mechanism that adjusts the speed with which the door closes again, which needs to be gentler than it would be for an able-bodied person. It takes longer. In the bathroom, different taps which can be pushed rather than turned. The sighting and the adjustability of the shower unit, the provision for seating, so you can shower by moving from a wheelchair into a seated position quite quickly, and warnings and care notices around the heat of the towel rails and so on. So there's a lot of subtle pieces. There's always if you fall over or you can't move, how do you raise an alarm? And the provision of red cords are seen as a fairly ubiquitous measure now. So there's a whole raft of issues like that. But in some cases, going back to the Brooklyn example, we put ceiling hoists, tracks into the ceiling in 2 of the disabled rooms. They're not in all because the demand is not there, but we felt 2 was a reasonable number. So it can be all as much as you like. In addition, there's signage which is suitable for in Braille for blind people, those who are hard of hearing, and alerting us so that we can get communication to them other than through the telephone, etc., etc. So there's a whole raft of measures, and it's quite a chunky subject.
Yeah, I mean, in the end, we say 14 million people in the UK that have a disability there or thereabouts, and then you can sort of segment down into mobility, dexterity, or visual impairment, hearing or deaf, neurodiversity, so learning disabilities, autism, dyslexia. And then I think if you lay the social model prism of the barriers, then you just start to get to, okay, what would be a barrier for that group or that group? And then, as you've just said, there's so many solutions that appear, particularly with new technologies. I mean, I had a client, I've done a bit of work in Catalan or Catalonia and Basque Country in Spain. And although they might argue they don't want to be part of Spain at the moment, but for now they are Spanish. And they had some hotels we tried out where there were iPads that could operate the TV and the light switches, and so that the smart home, smart technology stuff is opening up a new wave of accessibility options, right?
Indeed. Yeah. The issue is that you can satisfy most of the people most of the time, but to satisfy everybody all of the time is something we strive for, but it's unlikely we'll ever get there. But all you can do is make it, do your very best, I suppose.
And that's business, right? Like even the businesses that operate in markets that, you know, as it comes to disability, it feels like we're finally getting traction, that we are consumers, we are citizens, we are voters, you know, politically as well. Whereas in the past, it was very often others made decisions for disabled people. So that empowering and social media giving us a voice has been really, really, really good. But yeah, even in markets where they've been recognized as viable business opportunities for centuries, you still can't please every customer, right?
Yeah, that's very true. But I do feel there is a new current that's flowing through here. I think there is a desire for change. I think the operators, sadly, COVID has limited some of that cash flow to be able to make those improvements, but I still think there is a desire to equalize and to stop having this by exception way of dealing with people with disability.
Yeah, agreed. Well, we're getting sort of towards the end. I mean, I think you've mentioned a couple of times that COVID has undoubtedly impacted your business because, you know, people have not been allowed to stay in hotels. So quite clearly that's been an issue. But well, maybe you do have a crystal ball. Let me know if you have got a crystal ball, Robin. But what are your feelings on the future, both in terms of coming out of COVID-19, but also your general, as you just sort of said, like, you know, general trends and sort of appetite for inclusion? How do you see things going in the next couple of years?
I think, sadly, disabled people will find that them as a priority catalogue or category, is likely not to be at the highest level of provision because cash is so of such paramount importance to every business now as we climb the slippery slope back out of COVID. And that's before we even deal with Brexit shambles, which is really going to mess us up. And if we just had a leader of government who could string a sentence together, it would be really helpful.
Yeah, do we wear a mask or not in a shop? It's been crazy.
Well, let's make up something that gets us off the hook.
Yeah.
So I'm very nervous about this. I'm more nervous about consumer confidence, that we have whipped ourselves into such a frenzy of fear
Yeah.
That unless corporate Britain wakes up in September and starts to go back to work and behave in an historic and accustomed way, we could end up with this paralysis, just putting rigor mortis into our country, and businesses will just be wiped out.
Yeah.
The high street, in any event, was starting to look really perishable.
Yeah.
There was the resurgence of banks, where restaurants and bars were moving into old bank buildings. But the traditional high street shop has been replaced so much by on-street shopping that people really find going to a high street an unpleasurable experience these days,
Yeah.
or less convenient. So you look at ghost towns or city centres now, which, apart from the tourism angle, have very few redeeming and attractive features. I think culturally, in addition to both COVID and Brexit, I think there's a very real issue: is what is the high street of the future going to look like?
Yeah.
Anyway, there we are. I'm sorry. I'm very, very nervous about the next 6 months.
No, understandably. I mean, do you think as this all plays out, we are more digital, sort of the online shopping, as you say, not rightly or wrongly, but for better or worse, it's happening more now. I mean, maybe there might be a sort of leisure and tourism focus to high street, so it might not be as much of shopping, but it would, there would be hotels and there'd be sites to visit and museums and theatre productions if the theatre survives this next year or two. But maybe it's going to be more a focus on leisure and tourism.
That's the only card that any self-respecting hotelier's got to play, because the corporate side is not there. The local drivers for business are not there, because your soliciting staff or your accountancy staff, they're all still working from home. They're certainly not going into an office and buying a sandwich from Pret a Manger. So it's the knock-on effect of what's happened here. We'll feel the effects of for many years to come, sadly. I remember when we first set up Bespoke, foot and mouth was the first pandemic that we had to deal with. And looking back at my notes, I realized how incredibly quickly we recovered. As soon as we determined that all the cattle had been slaughtered and we weren't going to give each other mad cow disease, the tap just got turned on. We just went straight back to normal trading levels. This time, I think it's going to be much, much slower.
Yeah, because of that fear and that paralysis, right?
Well, the redundancies that have inevitably been made. We've had some really strong trading times. The last 2017 through to 19, I think those 3 years, probably as good a set of trading figures as any hotel or restaurant business would have enjoyed in this country. And the only topic was, how can we find more staff? We just can't cope with demand. Well, finding the staff is not the issue, because there's plenty of them without jobs at the moment, sad to say.
Yeah, I mean, as a disabled consumer that's always loved my trips and leisure and tourism adventures, shall we say, I know that. I mean, I've been shielding. I'm within the labelled vulnerable group, even though I think if I was naming the group, I wouldn't have said vulnerable myself. But I am really starting to miss those trips, and if I can find a place that's accessible like I always needed, but has demonstrated the precautions around COVID-19, I am starting to feel like it would be lovely to get away for a few nights. And in the UK, I'm not ready to jump on a plane. I'm actually doing a webinar for Visit England in a couple of weeks, I think it is. I'll share it on my social media later, the specifics. But I think there is still the potential that the staycations, there will be a boom, because I think people do want to get away and have a break. It's just going to be about trusting, that the COVID-19 situation isn't putting themselves at higher risk. And I think
Martin, something has to break between now and when the clocks go back. It's at the start of winter, and it really has to flip at that prior to that point, or lockdown through the recessionary times that we've got at the moment. It's just going to be unbearable. It really is. So.
Yeah. But I presume you've had the talks and the policies around how the hotels will be safer from COVID-19, right? There must be changes you've made.
we've written our own charter. We've done online training to all staff, brought them back off furlough, trained them, sent them back on furlough. We've now put them back into the business, and as we start and have already started to reopen our hotels, so we're adjusting, because no matter how much you lay your plans out prescriptively, by the time you actually put them into practice, you'll see things that you hadn't thought of before. So we're adjusting and tweaking and augmenting where appropriate, and learning a little bit on the way. But we've done everything we can to put custom and practice in that would mitigate. The best advice I saw from any commentator on this was Brian Moore, the ex-England rugby hooker.
Oh yeah.
The best way to deal with COVID-19 is to assume you've already got it, and do everything in your power not to give it to anybody else.
I
think that sense that you could be a lethal weapon without having any idea that you could be. If we all behave like that, we're not going to hurt anybody else. So.
But we can also still get on with more parts of day-to-day life with those precautions.
Correct.
Cool. Well, I'm going to be in touch soon, Robin, because I'm looking to get away when the shielding ends. So maybe there's something we can do. There might be something we can do together to try and demonstrate that it can be viable and safe for disabled people to have a couple of nights away and get out the bloody house after 4 months, right?
Well, I'm sure you're going stir crazy, but we'd be honoured to help if we can, Martin. So thank you.
All right. Was there anything else you wanted to share before we close?
I think, if I may, just give a plug.
Of course.
Know a little bit more about the Access Awards. It's the Blue Badge Access Awards, all one word with an S on the end, .co.uk. If you'd like to know more about Bespoke Hotels, then that's Bespoke Hotels with an S on the end, all one word, .com. And the hotel, which we're just in the process of reopening, where we've really gone the extra mile as an exemplar of what we hope is best practice, is called hotelbrooklyn.co.uk. It's in Manchester. But if you want something further south, one hotel where we've taken an historic coaching in is in Dorking, and that's called the White Horse, dorking.co.uk. And there we've done our very best to make the mix of 17th century pre-wheelchair environment, new post-wheelchair world, and certainly have had a very favourable response to the bedroom provision we put into place. So hopefully those will be helpful to your listeners.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And I'll over the weekend I'll try and write a couple of the links on the chat threads. But if people Google Blue Badge Awards, Bespoke Hotels, etc., it will come up on the search.
If that doesn't work me, then it's robin@bespokehotels.com.
Brilliant. Awesome. Well, yeah, it's been a pleasure, Robin. Really nice to spend a bit of time with you and hear about your journey and story and all the great work you're doing. And let's cross our fingers that it's not going to be so terrible in the coming months and years, and we can all bounce back eventually.
Thank you so much, and goodbye to everybody. Enjoy your day. Thank you so much.
All right. Cool. Thanks everyone for watching. Have a lovely weekend, and I'll be back Monday for the next episode of the Daily Sip. In the meantime, have a great Friday. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.